In this video we are going to study a masterful game in which we will see how white will destroy the Sicilian defense with the Grand Prix attack. The game started with the moves e4, c5. The Sicilian defense. Black moves his side pawn and takes control of the d4 square, preventing white from occupying the center with his pawns. If white wants to place a pawn on d4, black can capture it, thus keeping a central pawn majority. Now, white played knight c3, developing his queen's knight and increasing control of the d5 square. In this way, the typical reaction in the center with d5 is prevented, which is the move normally used by black to free up his position in the Sicilian defense. Black played knight c6, developing his queen's knight and increasing control over the d4 square. White played f4, beginning to advance his kingside pawns and increasing control over the central squares. White's plan was to continue with moves like knight f3, castling, bishop c4, d3 and then prepare the attack on the kingside. Black played g6, with the idea of developing his king's bishop into the fianchetto, where it will be very well placed, as it will occupy the large dark square diagonal and increase control over the d4 square. White played knight f3, continuing the development of his minor pieces. After bishop g7, white played bishop c4, developing his king's bishop into a good diagonal and preparing to castle. White's bishop is very well placed on this diagonal, as it aims for the f7 point and exerts a lot of pressure on the kingside. Black played e6, with the idea of blocking the action of the white bishop. Black's plan is to develop his king's knight on the e7 square, so as not to obstruct the action of the bishop on g7. Afterwards, black can castle and in the future he can prepare the reaction in the center with d5, to free up his position and balance the game. Now white played f5, an interesting move, with the idea of attacking quickly and creating weaknesses in the opponent's position. It is important to make this move before the black knight develops on the e7 square and can control the f5 square. Now, black did not want to weaken his position and played knight g to e7, developing the king's knight and preparing to castle. White captured on e6, with the idea of opening the f-file for the attack. Black recaptured with his pawn towards the center. White castled. Black castled. White played d3, connecting the pawns and freeing up the passage to be able to develop the queen's bishop. Now, black played d5, reacting in the center with the idea of freeing up his position and balancing the game. White played bishop b3, retreating his bishop to a safer square, to avoid it being captured. If black now captures the e4 pawn, white can respond with knight takes e4 and the e6 pawn is weakened. Black can play knight a5, threatening to capture the white bishop, which is a very strong piece. Now, it would be a mistake to capture the c5 pawn, since black responds with bishop d4 check. After knight takes d4. Queen takes d4 check, black wins material. After the move knight a5, white can play bishop a4, with the idea of keeping his bishop. Black can play b6, with the idea of developing his queen's bishop on the b7 square. White can play c3, blocking the action of the bishop on g7 and freeing up the c2 square for the queen's bishop. After bishop b7, white can play queen e2 and retain a slight advantage. In the game, after the move bishop to b3, black played h6, taking control of the g5 square, with the idea of preventing the white pieces from using that square. White played queen e1, with the idea of moving the queen to the kingside to attack the enemy king. If black now captures on e4, white recaptures with the knight and moves it closer to the kingside and the e6 pawn becomes weak. White would have an advantage. In the game, after the move queen e1, black played a6, with the idea of expanding his pawns on the queenside, to try to obtain counterplay. White played queen h4, moving his queen to the attack on the kingside and threatening to capture the h6 pawn. Now it is not possible to play king h7 to defend the pawn, since white can play bishop g5, completing the development of his minor pieces and bringing the bishop into the attack, taking advantage of the pin along the h-file. After, for example, b5. White can play e takes d5, with the idea of opening the game. After e takes d5, bishop takes d5, white is winning. In the game, black played g5, hoping to push back the opponent's queen. But white responded with bishop takes g5, sacrificing the bishop to destroy the opponent's king's defenses. In case of h takes g5, white plays knight takes g5 and wins, as the black king will not resist many more moves. In the game, black played rook takes f3, trying to exchange pieces to relieve the pressure. After rook for f3, black played h takes g5. Queen takes g5. The pawn wall in front of the black king has been completely destroyed. Black's pieces are having difficulty getting into play and the black king is in serious danger of being checkmated. Black captured on e4, with the idea of making room to move his pieces. After knight takes e4, black played knight d5, placing his knight in the center and freeing up the action for his queen, with the idea of exchanging queens and repelling the attack. White played queen h5, with the idea of keeping the queens on the board and continuing his attack. Now b5 would not be possible, with the idea of developing the queen's bishop on the b7 square, because white plays queen f7 check. And after king h7, white plays rook h3 check and the black king is checkmated. After the move queen h5, black played queen e7, with the idea of defending the f7 square and avoiding the threat of checkmate. White played rook to f1, incorporating the queen's rook into the attack, which was the last piece that had to be brought into combat. Black played knight e5, attacking the opponent's rook and bringing his knight closer to the kingside to reinforce the defense. White played rook g3, defending his rook and pinning the bishop on g7. The immediate threat is to capture the knight on e5, taking advantage of the pin along the g-file. Black played knight f7, anticipating the opponent's threat and bringing his knight closer to defend his king. White played bishop takes d5, eliminating the black knight from the center and eliminating a key defender on the f6 square. After e takes d5. White played knight f6 check. Black cannot capture on f6, due to the pin along the g-file. So, black moved his king to the f8 square to defend himself from check. The whites played rook takes g7 and black resigned. For example, in case of king takes g7. White plays queen h7 check. And after king f8. Queen g8 is checkmate. A very instructive game in which we have seen how to destroy the Sicilian defense with the Grand Prix attack.